Esa Ride Sharing Company ARASA.ca என்ற இணையதளத்துக்கு சென்று Esa Drivers ஆப்பினை டவுன்லோட் செய்து டிரைவர்ஸாக வேலை வாய்ப்பை பெறுங்கள். மாதாந்தம் $4,000 வரை சம்பாதியுங்கள். வணிக நிறுவனங்கள் Esa இணையதளத்தின் மூலம் மளிகைப் பொருட்கள் மற்றும் உணவுப் பொருட்களை விற்பதோடு வாடிக்கையாளர்களுக்கு டெலிவரி செய்யலாம். தமிழில் தகவல்களை அறியாளையுங்கள். GTA பற்றி 40 ஆண்டுகள் அறிந்து கொண்டவரும் வீடு விற்பனை துறை ஊடாக மக்களால் அறியப்பட்டவருமான சிவா பிள்ளை 416-854-0005. Taxi broker licensed by City of Toronto.
Recording in progress.
Why we need the cap rate for the commercial market and how to calculate the cap rate, those kind of things. He couldn't able to come last class. Then that's mean he asked me to repeat again. I'm going to do that one. And plus we're going to talk about the environmental. Before we start about the environmental side, we will discuss about the environmental side. The first I'm going to discuss with the questions, whatever we have. Okay. This week I get the 4 different salespeople. Yesterday alone 2 people, 4 different salespeople called me, and they said that they sold the property in March, and they don't. The appraisal value come lower. Appraisal value come lower. Yesterday evening at 6 o'clock, 2 agents called me. One from Whitby, 910,000 property came out exactly 100,000 lower. The clients wanted to buy with only 10% down payment. That's been the appraised value 100,000 significantly really high in their transaction. And he asked me, okay, the deposit only less than $50,000 deposit. What is the best way to do for this scenario? And 2 days ago, one of the salesperson called me, and he said his clients refinancing one property and getting 10% to buy the property, but at the same time, appraisal value came for $125,000. He asked me, our company can finance it for that particular balance? I said to him, exactly no, because our financing company also, we have a risk analysis. We had to do it. Plus somebody's money, we are spread it out. But if appraisal value is lower, that's mean we have regulations too. We work with the government regulations. We had to go only up to 85% loan to value. Based on the appraisal value. Then 2 days ago, I told him no, nothing we can do in our side. Hope he understood. But yesterday's agent's question, he is buying with 10% down payment, and 100,000 came lower. That's mean the appraised value came more than 10%. In that case, I asked, and then I told him, the clients cannot able to handle the pain, even though they go for a second mortgage and go with the second mortgage 10%, 11% interest rate and lender fees and legal fees and everything. As a 10%, the 10% down payment buyer, even a regular buyer, maybe he can buy and manage, but the appraisal value came lower. That means he's looking for another 20% outside. That means that's a huge big amount. Then the agent asked me, what are the lawsuit the buyer can face? That's the question we are talking about today. Another salesperson said, our office deal, $420,000 appraised value came lower in the Whitby area. Sorry, I am not giving the bad news or anything for this early morning for you guys, but this is a reality today. What are the houses we sold in we closed the transaction in the end of February and March. Before the closing, the market changed. Time adjustment is very important one. Time adjustment is there. There's time adjustment is the value is changing it. In this case, we have an issue right now. There's a serious issues we have. And the lawsuit side, the salesperson asked me about the lawsuit. I told him I will explain today. For example, if the buyer doesn't close the transaction, the lawsuit, there are two kinds of lawsuits. One, suing for the deposit. Who is suing for the deposit? Seller. Seller can sue for the deposit. First, mutual release. If they come to the agreement, and they want to do the mutual release, yes, they can do the mutual release, and 50-50 or full money they are giving to the seller and release the transaction. There is no lawsuit. If there is no mutual release or no agreement between the agents or between the buyer and seller, then what will happen? The seller can sue for the deposit. Suing for the deposit is most wise idea for the seller side, because reason, the deposit is already sitting there in the company, either law office or else real estate office. Mostly the transaction, 99% real estate office, we are holding the money under the trust of the borrower's money. In that case, the buyer's money. In this case, what they had to do, seller suing for the deposit is very easy lawsuit. The very first attempt or second attempt, the courts can order to release the deposit, but that's not the end of the story. After they suing the deposit, they can go for the further lawsuit. If they want to go for the further lawsuit, whether they sell the property higher price or lower price doesn't matter. What the price, but still they can go for a lawsuit. That lawsuit based on the smart sellers and the smart sellers lawyers. What they do, they check the profile of the buyer. If the buyer is the first time buyer trying to buy for the 10% down payment, he doesn't have any other properties in Canada. In that case, they don't waste time mostly. They hard to, even though the lawsuit go against the buyer for another 50,000 or 100,000, how are you going to collect the money? The lawsuit is different than collecting the money. In that case, most of the smart sellers and the smart sellers lawyers doesn't go for the lawsuit unless otherwise the person is wealthy and he already have two houses and the business running under his name and this and that, then they can easily go for a lawsuit. Otherwise, they don't go. But the suing for the deposit, yes, suing for the deposit is a very basic one. They will sue for the deposit, guys. Then what is the remedies right now? We are here, real estate agent is my side. I want to give the remedies for you guys rather than they're like a lawyers just giving the advice. Okay, the remedy is here right now. Okay, tell that advise your clients. No, the private company is not going to give the mortgage because they go for the appraised value too. But we all exactly know either stock market or the housing market or anything. We are looking for the paper money, not for the real money. Real value is not there. The paper value is there based on the market condition. That's the reason the market we saw it. Even some areas 200%, 300% went up. Even the appraised value coming a little bit less, 100,000, 200,000 less is not really, we are losing value. The paper value, we are losing a little bit. Okay, explain to your client to borrow the money from someone else other than the private company is not going to give. If they borrow the money from somebody else and put the money, the housing definitely rebound back for the next year. In that case, they can refinance it and give the money back, or else go to the different institutions. Institutions are different. Different institutions having a different appraised companies and different kind of valuation. In that case, rather than be simply leaving the deal, you can try with the different appraisal companies, and some appraisal companies try to give at least instead of 100,000 less, the other appraisal company may come up with only 50,000 less. In that case, we never know. Advise your clients to go to a different mortgage broker and try to get extension, and try the different financial institution for the transaction. Okay, I'm going to go through the next one. The next question is, as we discussed the last class about the cap rate question, the salesperson called me and asked about the cap rate, and his question, what is cap rate, how to calculate the cap rate, and how can he increase the cap rate for the buyer's benefit and everything. I did this one last class, guys. Please, I don't have a choice. I want to explain to you. This is good for you guys too. Whoever is new, you can learn that one too. Okay, the reason what is cap rate is a capitalization rate. Capitalization rate means you are looking for the property for the commercial property, commercial transaction, commercial property, commercial industrial properties. If you invest the money, for example, if you have money in your hand, you are looking where I can invest the money and get the better interest rate. For example, today, if you have some money in your hand, if you are investing the money in the bank, you are going to get only 1.5% return of investment. Versus you are investing different areas. But this is the area for the commercial area. If you put the money, if you say 1 million you have, the particular money, if you buy it, if you are buying the commercial properties, how much rate of return you're going to get for your investment? That's called capitalization rate. Why we need to calculate the capitalization rate? For example, when you value the properties, property value, there are two different between buying the residential property and the commercial property. Residential property, everybody looking to buy with their heart. They need this property because they like it. They like the property to live there, garden, front garden, backyard, and the kitchen and the living room spacious, and the downstairs the basement is like a nice TV room. They're buying it. Commercial, not like that. Commercial, we are buying with the head. How much money we put, how much return we can get back. Are we losing money or are we gaining money? If I put 1 million, what's the percentage of return I'm going to get for this money? What is the rate of inflation in this country? And there are so many other calculations. Okay. For example, when we buy the commercial property, commercial properties are not the similar. For example, the basic commercial, we always talk about a store and apartment. Downstairs is a commercial store, and upstairs is 2 apartments, something like that. If we are going for those kind of properties, what will happen? You don't look 2 identical properties. You're never going to look 2 identical properties because everything is different. In this case, we need to have a platform. That platform is a cap rate formula platform. Cap rate formula R, capitalization rate R is equal to IOV. That's the formula. Capitalization rate R, that's the rate of return. R is equal to I. I stand for net operating income. Net operating income divided by the value of the property. Net operating income, we calculate the gross rent. How much gross rent or potential gross rent? In case the property is vacant, we are looking for the potential gross rent. Less TMI, tax, maintenance, and insurance. After we deduct the tax, maintenance, and insurance, whatever we're going to get, that's called net operating income. That net operating income, we're going to divide by the value, we're going to get the cap rate. In this case, the basic understanding, R is equal to IOV, V for the value of the property. That's the listing value. For example, the last class I prepared this one, I still have it. Value of the property, say 2 million, and the income, collecting the income $8,000 a month, 96,000. Taxes, say $9,000 taxes. Maintenance company charging $500 to maintain the property, $6,000 maintenance fees. The bills around $3,600 bill, and the insurance $2,000. Say $20,600 we are getting, or the TMI tax, maintenance, insurance, and the cost is $20,600. In this case, we are collecting 96,000, 8,000 multiplied by 12, 96,000 less the TMI. 75,400 is coming as a net operating income. If the 75,400 net operating income, property value is 2 million, Then 75,400 divided by 2 million multiplied by 100 is coming up 3.77 cap rate. That means the investment return, you're going to get only 3.77. That's not enough. Nowadays, at least I'm looking for 5% rate of return, right? 5% rate of return plus the age of the property, and there are so many other factors also involved. If you want to get 5% rate of return, what you had to do, the net operating income divide by interest rate, the 5% interest rate, then is coming up to 1.5 million, $8,000. That means if you bargain and bring it down the price of the property, your cap rate goes higher. The standard cap rate you can see right now, the different properties, brand new plaza sometimes is going only for 4.5%, and older plazas going for 8-9% because property is older. And there are ways we can calculate the cap rate side. And before we start the seminar, I like to go with you guys for the basic understanding of environmental side. Environmental. Then when the specialists come, you will understand more. Hope you already watched the environmental phase one video. Environmental, and when it's come to the environmental side, we call that as a environmental site assessment. Environmental site assessment, phase one Esa, environmental site assessment, and phase two and phase three. That's the way we call. Okay, phase one environmental site assessment. Phase one environmental site assessment. Phase one environmental site assessment means we're going to have three different basic categories we're going to go through. First one is a visual inspection. If somebody buying why we want to go on the environmental report? If we are buying the property, who need the environmental report and what are the properties we need the environmental? That's better now to know first. Okay, if you are buying the properties, there are kind of properties the lenders, before they lend the money, they ask for the environmental report. The example of the properties are basically the commercial properties, commercial freestanding properties. Commercial freestanding properties, just the lenders definitely they ask for the environmental site assessment report. If the report comes, the environmental phase one report, we'll talk about what is the difference between phase one and phase two before 10 o'clock, before the real seminar start. The commercial properties, freestanding commercial properties, they ask. Freehold properties, even some freehold properties with the bigger land with the main road properties. If it's the properties in the main road properties, even though the vacant land is a residential land, some lenders ask the properties, bigger properties, because they wanted to find out there is no other historical data is not there for the contamination in that particular land, especially if it is main street. For example, the main street, the tractor trailers was carrying the oil, and they made an accident for 10 years ago, or near to the highways. Any accident that caused 10 years ago, maybe right now we don't know. Maybe the contamination may be there. That's the reason they look at it. Even though the accident happened 200 meters away, but at the same time the oil might leak with the drainage water, the drainage time, and those kind of things. They want to check it out. There's farmland. Some cases farmland. They ask for the environmental report, even though we know 100 acres farmland, nothing happened. Historical data showing the farmland. At the same time, all these years we are using the fertilizers. If the farmland is not solid, not a flat one, if it's a slope one, what will happen? The fertilizers, all the fertilizers contamination may go to the slope area. In that case, some cases, in my experience of the real estate experience, when I sold the farmland, just they ask for the environmental report for the farmlands, and there are exceptions. Condo commercial. If the property come with a condo commercial, condominium complex and condo commercial, either industrial or commercial, they cannot ask for the environmental report because the whole complex. Environmental report they need for the whole complex. We are buying only for the one unit of that particular commercial. In that case, the lenders doesn't ask. Careful on those side. And even we are buying the plaza. That's coming out of the commercial again. Okay, now we will see quickly before the specialists start for the seminar at 10 o'clock. What is phase one? What is phase two? Okay, environmental phase one, environmental site assessment phase one. Environmental site assessment phase one come with three data is involved. The first, they do for the site assessment. When they do for the site assessment, they visually go there. The company who doing the environmental report, they go there and look at the site. What is the usage right now, the present usage, and what are the wastages in the areas and everything. They just go for a regular visual inspection for the site assessment. Second thing, record review from the Federal Bureau. Okay, environmental bureau is there. I don't know exactly when they started, but environmental phase one, each and every land is a federal bureau. They go there and pull the like our credit report. They go there and check the credit report, like the site report, and they pull that report and see what are the historical data is available, and that particular unit as well as the site areas for the map, what happened adjoining properties. And the third one is an interview with the owner. If they can get a chance to the previous owners, they can do that one too. At least the current owner, they do the interviews. Those are the one phase one. That's only a report. And phase two is the soil testing, groundwater testing, and again the site inspection. In the phase one come any suspicious in the data, they want to do the phase two. The phase two environmental based on the size of the site and how far they're going to take the mineral water and the underground water and everything. Maybe we'll wait and listen for those special informations. And site inspection is a regular site inspection. They go there and verifying the present conditions. And remedies and action plan for the corrective plans. That's based on the needs and how many years we want to correct this one. Urgency, or we have to do it right away, or we have more time to do it. Depends on those one. The corrective companies, they do the action plans. Based on that one, some cases, even multi-residence unit apartment, that's also falling under the environmental assessment, because used to be the multi-resident apartments heated by the oil heating system. Even though the houses by the oil heating system, house oil tank was underground in the basement, and the multi-residence properties oil heating system, oil tanks are outside oil tanks. Sometimes that's buried in the ground. When they convert it to the gas or anything, they don't. Sometimes they leave the tanks in under the soil. Those are the situations they ask, and we'll wait and see for the special environmental and other areas. Kanna, are they ready? You're going to start, or you will wait, Kanna?
Yep, I believe we can. Sam, are you there? Are we waiting on anyone?
Good morning, everyone.
morning,
I am ready. I believe I'm joined by Mike Grayhurst, the head of our environmental department and my boss at OHE Consultants. And
I'm here. Yes, I'm here.
Possibly, thank you, Mike. And possibly Fred Atrash, a president of OHE as well. We are ready to start if you guys are.
Perfect, Uncle. What do you say?
Thank you, Sam. Thank you so much for your time, and you value our group of peoples and spending the very valuable Saturday with the nice weather and everything. Thank you so much, Sam. Pleasure meeting you.
Thank you. Likewise. Thanks for the intro on the environmental. So Kenan, I'm gonna attempt to share my screen. Hopefully I did a good job here. Can everyone see the presentation?
Yep, perfect. It's coming up right now. And Sam, before you delve into this, I just want to tell everyone, it's a great pleasure having you on board. I've worked with Sam. Now we're actually working on the second project, let's just say, for one of our transactions. A great company, great service. Honestly, Sam bailed me out of a transaction, a pretty expensive transaction as well. And he was able to get his team in to Sarnia. I believe that project was in Sarnia, right, Sam?
That's correct, yes.
Yeah, it was all the way out in Sarnia, and Sam was able to get that project done in 2 weeks for me. And it's great. Of course, 2 weeks is such a short amount of time frame. I'm sure you're going to be talking about the time frames that are required whenever it comes to the services that your company runs. But just a little bit of history about OHE while we have everyone on board right now. In my opinion, one of the best consulting firms in Canada, let's just say, especially, I believe your network of services runs through BC, Alberta, Quebec, Nova Scotia, and Northern Ontario as well. So, there's a great amount of vast resources they have. They're a multidisciplinary firm, but OHE, Sam will probably discuss about this as well. They specializes in many aspects of environmental consulting, such as hazardous material, occupational hygiene, building science engineering, environmental engineering, geotechnical engineering. I would say the best part of, just working with you guys is the fact that, you are on top of everything, like, providing a request, giving you guys getting in contact with clienteles, especially the buyers. The transaction is very smooth, how you guys are, always in contact with the buyers to get everything done in a timely manner, and also in contact with sellers as well. Now we're speaking about, residential and commercial real estate aspects. The deals that I've done with Sam are mainly within, multi-residential units, 12plex, 8plex, and etc. As a realtor, speaking on behalf as a realtor and also a mortgage agent, the value of service here really makes our professional job a tad bit easier. Why? Because we're relying on the professional services provided by Sam and his team. I know that Mike and Fred are here as well, so thank you very much for being on board. And we're honored, and I'll leave it up to you, Sam.
Thank you. So can you see the presentation?
Yeah, we can.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks for the intro, Kenan and Selva. We're glad that we made a good impression. So that's always good to know and heartwarming. So thanks for giving us this opportunity to talk a little bit about us, OHE consultants, and what we do and who we are. I know everyone's busy, so I'll just get right to it. I'll try to actually set my clock here and limit it to 20 minutes, give or take. Feel free to cut me off anytime, and also any questions afterwards. So OHE Consultants is, as Kenan mentioned, an environmental consulting firm established in 2001. We're a multidisciplinary company providing a wide range of environmental real estate related environmental services, environmental engineering, geotechnical, occupational hygiene, health and safety, hazardous materials, and building science. Our head office is in Mississauga, but we have satellite offices across Canada, as Kenan mentioned, which enables us to provide services pretty much all across Canada, as we have been doing over the past years. What today I'm going to be talking about is basically, and I think Selva touched upon the important stuff. It's just reiterating some of the things that he mentioned. Basically, Phase One environmental site assessments, aka ESAs. Phase Two ESAs, soil and groundwater remediation, and then a little bit about just very high level. I don't want to bore you guys with too much technical stuff, but risk assessments, remediation, and also a record of site condition. I'll just power through those slides just to give you basically a taste of what they are, and then in case there's more interest, we can definitely come back and talk about them. So when is an ESA required? As Selva mentioned, generally two case scenarios. A is that in cases where, let's say you have a planned development or something like that, that the current land use of a property is about to change and go from the current land use to a more sensitive land use, say from industrial commercial community, which basically are in one category as per the regulation, to the next category, which is residential, parkland, institutional, or from that or those two to agricultural, which is deemed to be the most sensitive. So in these cases, by law, you have to get what is called a record of site condition, known as RSC, and I'll talk about it a little bit more later in the presentation. And that process always starts with a Phase One ESA. And the second case scenario, which I'm assuming you guys maybe come across a little bit more frequently, is a due diligence for refi, financing, that kind of stuff. Basically transactions. Those types of Phase One ESAs are usually governed by the CSA standard, which is a less relatively stringent standard as opposed to our Ontario Regulation 15304. So we do due diligence Phase One ESAs for multiple reasons. One is a protection of purchaser against liability, right? So no laws against buying contaminated land, keeping a contaminated land, but you have to keep in mind that when you buy contaminated land, which is contaminated, you're buying contamination along with it. So that might and would reasonably very well impact your ability to maybe resell it in the future, or ability to finance it, or for regulatory liabilities, your liability towards your neighbors, right? If contamination goes from your property to the neighboring property. So those are the kind of things that you need to be mindful of. From the vendor side as well, I mean, once you sell a property, obviously you have no control over it. But even if the property changes hands multiple times, but things go south, and let's say a neighbor is contaminated, there's a lawsuit. Lawsuits, as you know, and you did talk quite a bit about lawsuits, they go up the chain, right? And then even the past owners are not necessarily off the hook. And finally, for lenders, a lender wants to know that the money that they're basically lending for a property, they need to know the environmental conditions of the property, and not just that. Also, a lot of times we see that they also need to know what condition the property is in terms of the building condition of the property, any urgent repairs or that kind of stuff, the integrity of the property. So that's a separate investigation that actually we've been involved with as well with Canan, which is called the property or building condition assessment, that we do provide that as well. So what is a Phase One ESA? Selva did a good job of actually summarizing the Phase One ESA. I guess I'll just reword it here. So Phase One ESA is completely non-intrusive, no sampling whatsoever. The whole intent is to identify potential sources of contamination with respect to the property, right? So in simple terms, we'll look at the property itself and the neighboring, adjoining, adjacent properties for their current and past records and conditions, right? So it is composed of two major, or as Selva mentioned, three. Now we group two and three together, I guess. So one is desktop research. So we look at publicly available records and also a bunch of other records that we actually pay for and purchase. Spill records, waste generation records, you name it, dry cleaners in the area, everything. And that is complemented by a site inspection. So we go to the site, we visit the site itself, and we walk around the neighborhood for a radius of anywhere between 100 to 250 meter radius. If it's a standard due diligence Phase One, limited to 100. If it's a regulatory Phase One, 250 meters. Make note of any potential sources of contamination, impacts. I'll talk about them later a little bit more in detail, let's say dry cleaners, gas stations, whatnot. And the site inspection would actually include the interview that Selva mentioned as well. So almost always we'd like to interview the current owner if they're available, or the current property manager, or somebody knowledgeable of the site and site operation, site history, and things like that, so we can ask our questions. You know, you guys have any knowledge of underground storage tanks back in the day, for example, right? Or historical heating systems in the building, any issues historically, and things like that. So the Phase One ESA needs to be supervised by what we call a QP ESA. In the context of ESA, a QP is a qualified person. So he or she needs to be a valid license holder as a professional engineer or a professional geoscientist, somebody who can basically validate the findings of the Phase One. And I guess doing what you guys do, you've come across a lot of consultants. You've seen probably a good range of prices from consultants, depending on the consultant, depending on the property. And so the range is usually typically from $2,500 to $3,000 basically. And OHE charges anywhere between $2,450 to $2,650 for an average property in GTA. We give a range because obviously it depends on where the property is, you know, mileage and things like that. And also if it's whether it's residential or commercial or industrial, how many municipal addresses. Obviously, with industrial or more complicated land uses, we expect more, say, inspection reports or maybe spill records. So they're a little bit more complicated, but that's typically the range, and we have found it to be a reasonable and competitive number. The next slide is the timeline. So again, we intend to say, we intend to turn it around usually within 10 business days. That's what we commit to, and that's what we deliver. What Kenan mentioned, the Sarnia project was a special one that was rush, and we had to charge rush surcharges. But that one, yes, we turned it around in a little bit more than a week, or a week, I believe. So we're quite quick in terms of our turnaround times. We don't necessarily wait for the draft report to come out. If we identify something that after senior review is you know, we're basically certain that it's going to warrant a phase 2, we'll pick up the phone and update our clients right away, basically. So that's that. Now, in the phase 1, as I mentioned, our goal is to identify potential sources of contamination or impact to the property, right? Here, I'm trying to give you some visuals and like a few maybe typical or more common, if you will, sources of contamination that you'll come across in, I guess, your day-to-day lives and also in the reports that you might review. Petroleum hydrocarbons, right? Everybody knows they're bad if there's leakage or incidents or accidents. Retail fuel outlets, gas stations, fuel storage tanks, more notably the underground ones, the buried ones, you know, issues associated with piping, leaks, that kind of stuff. Then petroleum hydrocarbons known as PHCs would hit the ground and seep into the soil, get into groundwater and cause issues. Other common sources are obviously, as you know, dry cleaners, right? With the exception of very, very old ones that use petroleum-based products that I don't think exist anymore, or the very new ones that use eco-friendly substances. Still, the vast majority of dry cleaners use halogenated solvents, right? Things like perchloroethylene, for example, which is a known carcinogen. And also fill materials, right? These could potentially be sources of metals and inorganic, basically, issues. I'm going to keep this high level, but actually Selva did mention this, that when we talk about a potential concern identified for a property, it could be either on site, your own property might have a history of a tank, might have a history of, I don't know, a spill or something like that. These are the ones that we call on-site concerns. Or we might identify something in the vicinity of your property, in the neighboring properties, right? Let's say, for example, in this case, a gas station up gradient or uphill, right? So we try to infer where the groundwater flow direction is in the area based on, you know, shallow topography, bodies of water, that kind of stuff. And then we would say that, okay, based on distance, based on the relative location, there is a potential that any potential contamination from that offsite source might have migrated to your property, might have moved to your property by movement of groundwater, right? Either dissolved in it or you know, just riding on top of it, depending on what kind of chemicals we're talking about, right? So that's why we cannot just discount any, basically all offsite concerns. We have to look at them a little bit closely. So if we do a phase 1 ESA and the potential concerns that we identify in a phase 1 ESA cannot be reasonably discounted, then the phase 1 ESA would inevitably recommend a phase 2, which, as Selva mentioned, is on the contrary, an intrusive investigation, which would involve soil sampling, groundwater sampling, right? So in that case, we would identify buried utilities. Obviously, we don't want to drill on top of any buried utilities. We identify which areas on the property are of potential concern, and then we propose a bunch of boreholes. We talk to drillers, we bring drillers on site, we book them, they bring a rigs of, and you can see a few photos here of various sizes, and they actually drill the ground. As they drill the ground and they use augers to drill the ground, and they take the augers out, we take soil samples. Once they're done, this is obviously not to scale, but just to show you at a high level what a borehole looks like, what a groundwater monitoring well looks like. Once the borehole is done, they're going to slide just a screened PVC pipe inside and then seal it and then put a cap on it. This is what we call a monitoring well. We come back after a few days, hopefully it has recovered, and then we can retrieve some water samples. So I'm not going to bore you with different ways of soil sampling, groundwater sampling. Let's just put it that way. There are different ways of doing it. But regardless of how we do it, at the end of the day, we come up with soil samples, groundwater samples in lab-provided bottles and jars that we submit to the lab to basically test for contaminants of concern. Now, when we get the results from the lab, we basically compare them to applicable standards. We have a total of, well, as you see in this slide, a total of 9 tables basically based on, you know, where the property is, if the groundwater is potable, non-potable, are we close to any body of water, any sensitive lands, that kind of stuff. We determine which table of standards basically apply to your property. And then we compare. If all the values are below the standard values, great, your property is quote unquote clean in terms of the parameters that we tested. If any of them exceed the standard values, as the jargon goes, we say there is an exceedance in soil and or groundwater, right? So once we find an exceedance, basically the phase 2 has identified that there's an issue with the property, right? And then there are next steps. Again, not sure in your lives how many times you've actually encountered situations where you've had to actually deal with a contamination in a property. So I'll just power through these slides. I don't want to bore you too much, but there are basically 2 main ways of dealing with contamination. Remediation, which is basically remediating, taking care of the contamination, either taking it out, backfilling it with clean soil, or actually injecting a bunch of chemicals in the ground to deal with contamination and make it kind of go away, for lack of a better term, or do a risk assessment. Basically acknowledging that the contamination exists, but I guess for lack of a better expression, just take a magnifying glass and look at your property conditions and come up with a set of standard values that would be higher than the generic table of standards. And then, you know, usually they recommend risk management measures, and they come up with a document called CPU, which is a certificate of property use. So basically, it's a controlled contamination. We know contamination is there, but we kind of risk it away. And then there are obviously pros and cons associated with remediation versus risk assessment, from you know, timeline, costs, that kind of stuff. A good example is when you have, for example, I don't know, contamination in groundwater. Contamination in groundwater is something that if you want to remediate it, you could be in it for many, many years and still not succeed. In those particular cases, maybe risk assessment might be a more viable option. And developers are actually, are more and more these days, have become fans of doing risk assessment. It tends to be, especially for special cases, less expensive than remediation. I talked about a record of site condition at the beginning of the presentation. What's a record of site condition? So as I mentioned, if you're going to a more stringent or more sensitive land use, the ministry would like you to submit and successfully file a record of site condition. That process starts with the Phase One Esa. And in this basically diagram, I tried to just show you the gist of it. So the process starts with a Phase One Esa. If a Phase One Esa says you're good, there's no need for a Phase Two, then that's the end of it. You can file or submit an RSC, or a record of site condition, based on that Phase One alone. Obviously, you need to log on to the ministry's website, attach a bunch of documents, legal survey, lawyer letter, all that kind of stuff. But then in terms of investigation, that's all you need. If your Phase One says, hey, there are a bunch of concerns that we cannot discount, so unfortunately we're going to have to do a Phase Two, then a Phase Two must be done. If a Phase Two basically shows no exceedances, so the property is quote unquote clean, you can do your RSC based on a Phase One, Phase Two. But if a Phase Two comes back with exceedances, then you need to deal with the identified contamination. As I mentioned, either through remediation or risk assessment. And once those two are successfully completed, you can file your RSC based on a Phase One, Phase Two remediation, or Phase One, Phase Two risk assessment. So that's pretty much, I try to keep it high level, or keep it brief without boring you guys with too many details. But that's basically the gist of what we do in terms of Phase Ones, Phase Twos, and dealing with contamination on properties. So you're welcome to ask any questions. Either myself or Mike or Fred would be happy to answer.
Well, thank you very much for that, Sam. Really appreciate that. Definitely high level indeed. So I think this is a great time. We have around 84 participants on board, and I know Salva is there, and he's eager to ask you some questions as well. Knowing him very well, I'm sure he has. So we have 84 participants here. Thank you everyone for being here again Saturday morning. This is the time. This is the time that all of you guys have the ability to ask questions in any deals that you've come across, anything that you're working on previously, or if you have clients within the commercial space that are looking to purchase. I think something that we can vouch for on our end is to always rely on experts' advice and to always have do our due diligence period. There's only so much that as a realtor we can do during our due diligence process. So actually, Sam, I might as well ask you the first question. Us being realtors and within this our aspect of job, how much due diligence can a realtor or a real estate agent do on their end before signing a contract or recommending a property to a client? What do you hope to see or expect within within a specified period before an actual agreement is signed? On our end, it's always best to definitely include conditions and clauses that protect our client, especially the buyer or even the seller, depending on how we're working on that transaction. And to make sure there's specified time frames, 30 days, 2 weeks, 6 months, 9 months, 90 days available for inspections to take place. But other than that, what else would you recommend us as a real estate agent to look out for?
Well, it really depends, I'd say. And the reason for saying that is that it really depends on who your client is. Like, to give you an example, we have developers. Some of our developer clients actually specialize in targeting contaminated properties and actually hunt those properties, deal with them, and then pass it on. So that's what they do. So those guys are okay. They're basically tolerance when it comes to risk and contamination is quite high. It's a calculated risk on their part. They actually embrace that opportunity to find a contaminated land, deal with it, and then sell it afterwards or develop it. So for them, it's not, I guess, so much of an issue. They just need to know what kind of a contamination they're dealing with. Is it $1 million or $10 million or $500,000, right? But I'm imagining that for a typical realtor who basically wants the deal to go through as quickly as possible. Obviously, you guys, I think your preference is that the property just passes by the lender with no issues, right? So in that case, I guess what you can do, like some of the potential concerns that I mentioned, even by walking in the neighborhood of a property. First of all, in terms of background documents, there are some of them that are just publicly available. So even you can search, anybody can search to see basically some of these stuff. For example, I don't know, Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry. A lot of these websites and databases are publicly available. And also by walking through the neighborhood, if you have a property, just take a look at the property based on what you can see right now. Is there a, I don't know, dry cleaner next door? Is there a gas station? Is there an auto repair shop, auto body shop? I don't know, salvage yard? All of these potential concerns that, again, might end up being discounted in a phase one, but may not. If there's a plaza with multiple dry cleaners on site, are those dry cleaners just drop-off locations, or are they actually do basically cleaning on site, right? Because if you're doing a phase one as per the regulation, if you have a concern which is on site, that warrants a phase two right off the bat. Maybe not so much for due diligence phase ones. We might be able to exercise our judgment and actually discount it based on evidence if that's enough. But there are a lot of things that a realtor or even a developer, I've been asked the same question by our developers. When we look for properties, what should we be looking at? So have your eyes open for gas stations, dry cleaners, salvage yards, auto repair shops, anything like that, and also the publicly available records. In terms of timelines, give us more time, as much as you can. And the reason is, like you said, it's not like always a phase one ends up just with a phase one, right? If a phase one happens to warrant a phase two, then you'll need time. So phase ones, we're relatively quick. We're actually quite quick, 10 days, or if it's rush, like Kanan mentioned, a week, we can turn it around. But a phase two, if you need to do it, the first thing you need to do is initiate public utility locates. This is done through a company called Ontario One Call, which is just a dispatch center, basically. But those guys have been a little bit understaffed recently, and their workload is so immense that basically for public locates, we usually give it 3 to 4 weeks these days. And on top of that, add to it the availability of drillers, right? So a phase two is not like that. You can turn around a phase two in a month. It just physically cannot be done, right? So the more time you give us, the better, obviously.
Perfect. All right, we'll leave the chat box open as well. I believe one question, someone has asked. Yeah, perfect.
I have a question. Sam.
Sure.
I understand the basic of the environmental side because of the transaction experience. But my question is that the plaza come with coins laundry. I understand why they very serious for the spa. The plaza come with the beauty salon or spa. Some lenders are very serious and asking for the environmental reports. Why is that, Sam?
For a beauty salon or a coin laundromat?
Not coin laundry. Regular beauty salon or spa.
I don't believe there's a reasonable concern with a spa or a beauty salon per se when it comes to their nature of operations. Okay. However, there might be, you never know, that spa per se might have a spill record, might have a waste generation record, I don't know. But just saying that it is a concern because it's operating as a spa or a beauty salon, unless Mike has a different opinion, I don't think that's particularly an issue.
Yeah, there could have been a past land use before the spa. So it might not be the current tenant in the plaza. There could be someone who might have been there 10 years ago. That may be the concern. So you have to look not just at who's currently on site, but who's been there in the 80s, 90s, what have you.
Okay, thanks, Mike.
Yeah, and I just want to add something to the thing with the lenders, Selva, as you know better than me, is not usually black and white. Okay. Even if the phase one identifies the concerns, we've done that numerous times. We actually talk with lenders. You know, they just want to get that level of comfort. If they can get it from the consultant, they're fine. If they can't, then, you know.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Mike. Thank you.
Yeah, well, on the part of lenders, like Sam's worked with our lenders through with the Bay Hill financials quite a lot as well. So yeah, you know, at the end of the day, you know, us being a lender as well, having a private and a public company, private lending company, yeah, lender satisfaction and comfortability is very important. Even with the fact of lenders doing a site visit to meet tenants in the property, to see the property itself, even before the phase one, phase two, or you know, building condition inspection takes place. Lenders do that on themselves, right? Especially in the private and alternative lending you know, spectrum, we're seeing that a lot. You know, if we're looking at institutionally, the full you know, the full reliance would now go on the consultants to provide the specified reports.
That's right.
But again,
That's right.
yeah. So
I also saw a question in the chat box. Can we do phase two without doing the phase one?
Mm-hmm.
So the answer is absolutely yes. So it just depends on what the client wants to do. The proper way of doing things is to do the phase one first, so that we could have a comprehensive look at, I don't want to use the word all, but all the concerns that would be reasonably identifiable, right? And then based on the phase one, we'll just identify the areas, as we call them, areas of potential environmental concern. And then we would basically tailor the phase two based on that. However, we've had many cases that the client comes to us and says, hey, I have a phase one from another consultant. Can you just do the phase two? Or I just want you guys to do a scoped phase two. I had a tank here. We took it out. I just want you guys to take a look at that. So that phase two, we label it either a limited phase two, or depending on a preliminary phase two, just to make sure we don't give the impression that it's a comprehensive phase two. But yes, a phase two technically can be done without a phase one if it's a scoped and limited phase two.
Thank you.
Since you just brought that up, Sam, now, do you see lenders preferring such a method when it comes to any of their requirements? In what circumstances have you personally been involved with completing a phase two rather than you know, going through phase one first?
A phase two without a phase one? I mean, clients were they already did a phase one. Let's say I don't know, the other party or the other end of the deal had already done a phase one, but let's say that other side of the deal is more comfortable with us, so they come to us for the phase two. We've had cases like that. When it comes to lenders, if a phase one is, it doesn't have to be done by the same consultant. If a phase one is done by a reputable consultant and the phase two is done by another reputable consultant, but a different consultant, but sufficiently address it, and basically the second consultant concurs with the findings of the first consultant and sufficiently addresses their concerns, then I guess the bank should be satisfied.
So how about especially brownfield, you can go right away to phase two. Am I right?
Mike, I'll let you take that on.
Yeah, no, you could, but without a phase one, you sort of don't know exactly what you're investigating. So what you likely will get will be a very expensive, overly comprehensive study. If you do a phase one first, you know exactly what the concerns are and where they are, so you can actually focus the phase two on those specific concerns, and not just have to sort of plaster the site from one end to the other with boreholes. So yeah, it's doable, but it's not efficient. It's not cost efficient or time efficient.
Thank you.
Especially the time is a factor, right?
Yeah. So we could do 6 boreholes as opposed to 16. That's days worth of field worker saving if you do more focused study, and you're saving a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
Makes sense. Mm-hmm.
Good morning, Sam.
Morning.
Great presentation, great answer, great, wonderful. We have seen an extended view of the environmental issue. I know we're talking about commercial and environmental, but I have a question that came to me when I did the residential area. Maybe you can answer this question. I was showing a property for my client, and it was a nice property. Only issue is their backyard fence back onto a gas station. So the client was asking me, is that going to be an issue in the future? So what I told them, if it's not meet the city, law or the criteria, they won't have a gas station in backyard. Like not a backyard, like the gas station is kind of after the fence. So is that going to affect that subdivision or that property particular in any way?
In address, what's the address?
Sorry, I'll just mute him.
So if I understand correctly, the fence encroaches on the gas station property?
Yeah, like you can see the gas station from the backyard. Like, how they have a subdivision that the fence will be the border of the end of their backyard, but the gas station is, you can see it. Basically, the gas station visible from their backyard.
Well, from an environmental point of view, having a gas station next door is usually a concern. Obviously, you have to see where the inferred groundwater flow direction is, but still, due to the proximity, a gas station is something that is usually a concern. That would, I can't say always, but usually a gas station next door would warrant a phase 2. But from a subdivision point of view, I'm afraid I cannot comment on that. I have to get more details and maybe get some expert advice on that.
So if I were you, will you not to pay attention to that property instead of buying them something else?
Can I jump in? Sorry, it's Mike.
Going to that property?
Sure, Mike, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. You have to look at the situation. You have to look, first of all, okay, how far away is the gas station? That's the first question I'd have. Secondly, how old is the gas station? Is it just 5 years old? Because gas stations currently built now are all built with double-walled pipe work, double-walled tanks, Veeder-Root control systems. Everything is spill controlled on gas stations now. So I'm not too concerned about current gas stations. If it's only built 2-3 years ago, I'm not that concerned. If it's much older, then you look at, okay, how far away is the gas station? What's the expected direction of groundwater flow? Groundwater typically flows towards water bodies. If you're near the Humber River, for instance, or the Don River, and you have the ground sloping in that direction, and if that's moving away from your site, then any contamination from an older gas station may flow away from your site. So what you have to do is you have to take a look at the individual situation. It could be an issue, but we don't know. We have to actually do a study.
Right. I mean, I guess nobody will pay attention to it when it comes to residential, but this is just came, out of blue. That gas station happened to be sitting, behind the house. Apparently, it's a new subdivision. It's a new shell gas station. Anyway, like you said, it depends how old it is, right? So I thought maybe throw it out there to find your expertise on this.
I believe we also had in the chat another question about how long it takes to deal with groundwater contamination by diaflora, I believe. So groundwater contamination, as I mentioned, is never good news, depending on what type of contaminants you're dealing with, because of multiple reasons. One, the dynamic nature of groundwater. And the second thing, a phenomenon known as rebound. So there are cases that, you basically, because you have to do multiple rounds usually and then do verification after that, you basically, let's say you do in situ, which is injecting chemicals in the ground. They react with groundwater contaminants and you basically break it down to, harmless substances like water, CO2 and things like that. But then you come back after a few months and you measure the parameters and they've gone, so they go down and then after that they go up again. This is what we call rebound. So that's why, depending on the extent of groundwater impacts and if it's like PHCs, petroleum related, or VOCs, volatile organic or halogenated solvents like dry cleaner related, for example, you could be into that project for many, many years. So that's why for groundwater remediation, you have to be very careful if you want to go down the remediation path versus risk assessment.
Perfect. I believe we have Delano's hand is up as well. After that, Sony can go.
Good morning, Sam. Good morning. Just a quick couple of questions on the power plants in Pickering and Clarington. Now we have a power plant over there in Pickering which has passed its expiry date, and we know there are some projects coming up by builders pretty close by. What is the kind of testing that might be in place? I mean, I don't think it just involves a Geiger counter and walking around the field, right? I mean, it must be a little bit more severe than that. And is there a projection of, yes, things look okay on the background radiation side now, but there could be an issue? Did you come across those situations? Have you dealt with anything in Clarington and Pickering around that area?
I haven't done power plants myself. I've done like substations, electrical substations. Those guys usually PCBs are a concern. Mike, have you done power plants in your previous life? Mike?
Sorry, I couldn't unmute there. Sorry, I have not done so, but we do come across situations that are new quite often when we do. So often we have to do some homework before we go to sites. I mean, right now we don't have good answers, but we will find good answers because sometimes people come to us with situations we've never seen before.
Perfect. In situations like that, we believe that the builders would have done their due diligence as well in order to build within an area that that's neighboring, a power plant or anything like that. The interesting part is on the lending side regarding a few developments in South Pickering that are somewhat close to the power plants that we have there. I haven't had much issues when it comes to getting mortgages, financing on those properties. But good question. Sony as well, you have your hand.
Hi, good morning, Sam. Good morning, Mike. Thanks for sharing your expertise. Quick couple of questions. In terms of like, if you find a property that is already contaminated after phase 1 and phase 2 studies, and if the buyer wishes to go through a process of decontamination this property, what is the cost? How do you analyze this cost of decontamination? I know it could be various things, like you said, soil, water, or both. If you can explain that. And second question is, your cost, does it go by the size of the land? Like, for example, if it's 1 acre land or somebody's buying a 15-acre land, your cost varies based on that? Those are my two questions. Thank you.
Sorry, before answering your questions, your second question, the cost, are you referring to phase 1 only?
Both, if we're to go for both 1 and 2.
As for the cost of basically taking care of contamination, sometimes our clients ask us over the phone, how much is it going to cost me to clean up? And this is where I want to just hang up and run away. Because without so here how it goes, because we have to see if contamination is in soil or is in groundwater or is in both. So based on the phase 2 that we did. Now, the thing that I didn't mention, because I just didn't want to go into too much detail, but that once we identify, because when we do a phase 2, we have so many boreholes, right? We have, let's say, 3, 5, whatever. If we identify impacts and if it's a regulatory thing, or if you actually want to clean up the site, the next step is to delineate the contamination. That is to try to determine the vertical and lateral extent of the contamination. So if we have 3 boreholes that they came back dirty, we want to do a few around them and then take samples from those locations from the same depth and also deeper depths, so that we could, I guess, just do like draw a line where we think the hot spot is, or the contamination is, so we know what kind of, or how big or small a contamination we'll be dealing with. So before knowing that, we cannot even think about remediating or risk assessment. Once we do that, and mind you, that's not necessarily a one-step exercise. You might try to delineate, and then your delineation points also all come back dirty. Then you need to expand your area or your depth. So finally, once you hopefully get to your delineation and the extent of contamination, depending on whether it's soil, whether it's groundwater, whether it's both, or which way you want to go. If it's soil only, let's say relatively shallow soil, you want to take it out ex situ, dig it out and then backfill it with clean fill, then that's a different issue. If you want to do in situ, that is inject, so don't touch the soil, but inject a bunch of chemicals in the ground, then obviously that's a different issue. If it's groundwater, back in the day, they did pump and treat. These days, they do in situ, for example. So really, depending on what you want to do, what medium is impacted, it could vary from, I don't know, $40,000 to $40 million. It's really, you cannot give a range without knowing. And to answer your second question, as far as a phase one is concerned, the size of the property is not necessarily a determining factor. Like I said, that's why we usually give a typical range for a typical property. What does make a difference, obviously, other than location, mileage, and things like that, is say residential versus industrial, for example. It's reasonable to assume that for industrial, you'll have at least a few inspection reports, or even for commercial inspection reports, maybe more spill records, that kind of stuff that we have to, like, for example, inspection reports, we have to buy them. So we have to put aside a little bit more money for that. And also it takes a little bit more time to visit, obviously, a huge industrial facility as opposed to a residential building, right? So the difference is not going to be like astronomical, but there is a difference there. When it comes to field work in phase two, it really depends on the scope of phase two and the number of boreholes that you're doing. So it's the size of the property per se is not necessarily a determining factor.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Sam, another quick question. Do you have a minute?
Yes.
Do we have some time, Connect? Yeah.
Yes.
Now, after you do your inspection and you suggest a few remedies, obviously, you're part of the process as well in the remedies, correct?
That is correct. However, let's say if the client, or based on our recommendations, wants to do, let's say, an in situ, for example, like injection of chemicals into the ground, we will work in collaboration with another company or companies that actually specialize in situ treatment. That's what they do day in and day out. So they would be our subs, just like the drillers would be our subs to drill your property. But yes, we will be, and we are involved in all phases of cleanup, remediation, and also we do a lot of risk assessment. So we don't have an in-house QPRA. So we are QPESAs, but we're not QPRA, RA standing for risk assessment. But we do have risk assessment companies that, again, we work with closely, many jobs that we've done and are doing actually currently, and we manage those jobs as well.
So Sam, after the property has been cured, so to speak, does the city do its own inspection, or is there like a provincial guideline which some other legislative body comes in and takes over to kind of inspect to make sure that everything meets the province's guideline?
So when you're talking about the city and province, I'm assuming that you're referring to, let's say, a regulatory investigations, for example, where a record of site condition is required by law, or maybe you want to do a development and the municipality is asking for a record of site condition. So as long as it is done by a reputable consultant and the job is done correctly, then you would submit those, well, for a record of site condition, not the reports, but a standalone document called CSM, that stands for Conceptual Site Model, and a bunch of other documents along with it. Or with the municipality, you would submit the reports to them. They have, as a matter of routine, they would usually get those peer reviewed by a different consultant. The peer reviewer usually comes back with sometimes questions, sometimes comments. If they are sufficiently addressed to the municipality's satisfaction, then no, the municipality doesn't, as far as I know, doesn't do an independent investigation. They rely on reputable consultants. That's why municipalities or other institutions, government institutions, usually have their roster of trusted consultants. Once you're on their list, basically they would trust you to peer review reports for them. So they would trust your word and opinion, technical opinion.
Very
I
good.
gotta sign off.
Thank you,
I
Sam.
apologize. I have to sign off. I apologize. I have to be somewhere else in a couple minutes.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Mike.
I really
Thank you so
appreciate
much, Mike.
being
Thank
here.
you.
Thank you so much.
We're wrapping up the session as well. If anyone has any other questions, please let us know. I believe, Dea, you've unmuted yourself. Maybe you have a question?
No, it's okay.
Nope. Okay, perfect. Wonderful. All right. Kumaresh, I believe you've unmuted yourself as well.
Yes, I think he answered something. Is for environmental phase one. So we have to get it ourselves, or we guys, the agent has to approach you guys. And you said, I think you take 1 month or something, but usually it's a condition is the offer is the environmental report. Is we can not put 1 month condition. So how to handle this issue?
Thanks for the question. Just to be clear, the phase one ESAs, it's not a 1 month. We turn it around in 10 business days. So let's say you give us authorization today, retainer, blah, blah. We'll just mobilize. We'll just order documents the same day after receipt of whatever, retainer and authorization, all that kind of stuff. And then we'll order documents. We'll schedule the site visit right away, and we will submit the draft report to you within 10 business days. If that doesn't work and you need it before that, let's say a week, then we're going to have to incur rush surcharges, because we're going to have to buy the background documents on a rush turnaround time. So it's going to be more, but we've done it. So the Sarnia job that Kenan was mentioning was actually a rush job that we turned around in a week. So the 1 month, no, it's 10 business days. When it comes to phase twos or drilling, then you're into months. Let's say a month and a half, 2 months, that kind of thing.
So the lenders, all the lenders ask the environmental phase one, something they need the paper in their documents. So that means all the street plaza or industrial area, or even though some other out of the city, the houses, residential area, but they use some commercial purpose. So they ask them the environmental report. So all the industrial or commercial plaza need the phase one.
It's really a question for the lender. So the lender usually wants to know that the property they're financing is in a quote unquote good condition, environmentally, right? So maybe they would be less sensitive on residential. I don't know. I'm not a lender, but based on my experience, and more sensitive on land uses and operations that would reasonably potentially more lead to contamination. Commercial, for example, they would be more sensitive on lending money on an auto repair shop, on a dry cleaner, that kind of stuff, right? But yeah, it's really all about satisfying the lender's concerns and requirements. So it's not like any property, just because a property is residential doesn't mean it's any cleaner than a typical a commercial unit. No. But having said that, there are certain commercial operations that are reasonably associated with potential concerns. If there is mishandling of chemicals, if there are accidents, incidents, and that kind of thing. So yeah, that's why lenders usually ask for a phase one to see what the condition is.
Perfect. Just to build up on that question, and also, to answer the part of the lenders, what I've seen, in the mortgage world is that when we go into alternative lending sphere of dealing with private financing companies, B-side lenders, or even credit unions, we tend to see further requirements such as BCA, such as ESA phase one, phase two, whatnot. Now, I've dealt with with Sam with multiple multi-residential properties. Now, Sam, correct me if I'm wrong, but do you see the multi-residential properties on a lower risk level compared to the other type of commercial units that we may see that would definitely have an intention of having any form of risks? And also, when it comes to lenders, I know that you work with institutional lenders as well. In what scenarios do you find the institutional lenders such as RBC, TD, and et cetera, asking for ESAs or BCAs and et cetera, depending on the property category?
Well, that's a good question. So again, I can't really give a black and white answer to this. Let's say a residential, but I can give you case scenarios. Let's say an old house, right? A house that was historically heated by way of an underground storage tank, which was there, maybe leaked. It was removed. There is no cleanup records about it. And then the heating then moved to, well, it was first coal, say, and then moved to underground storage tank. And then there was, gas lines in the neighborhood. Now they're on a natural gas, right? So maybe that underground storage tank, if it leaked back in the day, they didn't know anything about it. So that site, even though just a residential house, might be very, very contaminated. Whereas a commercial operation, let's say even an auto repair shop, if they're handling materials correctly, especially disposal of used, let's say, engine oil, used oil, or that kind of thing. If their hoists, in-ground hydraulic hoists are taken care of. We've done auto repair shops, and we've drilled auto repair shops that came back absolutely clean because the operation was done in a good way. So like I said, there are certain operations that are more prone to accidents, incidents, and statistically environmental issues, such as dry cleaners, gas stations, all the things that I mentioned. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you can just give a blanket statement saying that all auto repair shops are theoretically more contaminated than residential. It really depends on what you're dealing with and what kind of records you find. Or I'm just focusing on the property itself right now. And let's not forget the neighboring properties. You might have a residential property, nothing crazy going on, clean, but there has been a massive spill record, let's say 100 meters up gradient. 15 years ago, many liters of, I don't know, gasoline spilled to the groundwater. So this property could very well potentially be contaminated because of that historical offsite concern. So I'm afraid I cannot give a blanket answer to that. We have to look at each and every property specifically, focusing on the property itself and the neighboring properties, current situation, and the historical records. And I guess to answer your question, the same goes with the lenders. So we are on approved lender list for many of the banks that you mentioned. But again, it has been case by case. I cannot categorize them into like land use categories and then give you ideas on bank sensitivity.
Perfect.
I have a quick question.
We have around 8 minutes left, so we'll try to wrap up the questions fairly quick. Yes.
Yeah. So my question is, like, roughly, I know for a gas station, the cost could be higher, but then for a residential area, they had a tank before, and then now they had a leakage. And in order to fix a residential area leakage, what's a rough estimate you're looking at?
So leaking of, let's say, an underground storage tank back in the day, or?
That's right. Yes.
Okay. So if again, with minimal information on this site that you're talking about, I'm assuming that that there is a record of a leakage, and a phase 2 was done, or is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So a phase 2 was done, identified exceedances. In order to come up, as I mentioned before, with a cost of remediation, you have to do delineation. So depending on where that exceedance or impact or issue was identified through the phase 2, you need to do more boreholes, more investigation to try to determine the extent of that contamination. You also need to see whether it was only in soil or also in groundwater or both. And then basically see what you're dealing with and then get quotes. That kind of thing, I'm afraid I cannot give a number offhand. We need to see the extent of impact and also get quotes from, for example, for drilling, obviously, we have to go to our drillers and say, hey, we have 5 boreholes to this depth. This is the location. How much are going to charge us? We get the driller's quote. And then, for example, when we identify the hot spot, let's do in situ. We talk to an in situ expert. Okay, this is how many holes you need to do for your injections. What's your quote? So we get all those quotes. We put that in our budgeting system, also OHE hours, all that kind of stuff, and then we come up with a number. That kind of calculation cannot be done without having those quotes.
Definitely. So what's the lowest you think like a project, something like this to remediate would cost? I know the high end could be like in thousands of dollars, but then the lowest I'm asking, I just want to get some idea about that.
No, the higher end is actually in the millions of dollars, not thousands.
Yeah.
And the lower end, I'm not trying to evade that question, but honestly, it really depends. We have to get quotes, and depending on the extent of contamination, it could be. But just to give you like a magnitude, if a phase one is in the range of $2,450, $3,000, that's a phase one. A phase two is usually in the range of $7-8 grand to $20 grand, $25 grand. When you get into remediation or that kind of stuff, you're usually dealing with anything from, I don't know, 60 grand, 70 grand, all the way up. I'm just throwing you a number just to show that I'm not trying to evade that question. But honestly, these numbers don't mean, especially for remediation, if a consultant gives you like a number without knowing the specifics, just take that number with a grain of salt, because it's subject to significant change.
True, definitely. And Raj,
we understand, Sam. How can you tell the cost without seeing the problem? We understand. Thank you so much for your answers. Thank you.
100%. And Rajkumar, earlier Sam did say that it could go from $40,000 to $40 million. So if you want to use a spectrum, you can tell your client that.
Rajkumar, you call me and I'll tell you the cost.
But to be fair, we are asked this question actually quite frequently, and from our clients too. And we don't blame them, because at the end of the day, they want to know how much money they need to put aside. So it's a logical question, but we also, part of our job is consultation to sort of explain why we give such a wide range. And also we've had cases in the past that we gave a range to our clients and then came back a couple of years and our range was very much different. The client was quite sort of upset and said, why these two ranges differ so considerably? And our answer was that please refer to the assumptions that these ranges were based upon. A couple of years ago, this is the information that we had. This is the assumptions based on so many boreholes. Today, we know way more. And based on the updated assumptions, obviously, the range is different, right? So we tried not to get into that kind of a downward spiral, but that's what happens sometimes.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you.
There's 2 more questions in the chat box. I'm just going to shout them out to you, Sam. One that you already spoke about. Are there any I believe, let me go over here. Are there any ways that we can find out if a previous phase 1, phase 2 has been done on a property that's on the market? You spoke about databases available for possible information on the public side. Can we find out? Let's just say the question is, companies that have done phase 1, phase 2, would that be publicly placed out, or would that be only for? Well, actually, I know the answer to this, but yeah, how could you talk about that?
No, that's a good question. And actually, I've thought about this a lot way before. Unfortunately, no. With the private clients, because once you hire us, say, to do a phase 1, phase 2, anything, you pay us, you are our client, you own that report and product. We are not allowed to share it with anybody else. If you ask us to share it even with a lender, as we did with you, we will have to issue a letter of reliance with your express authorization, right? So with that, those reports go directly to the client, and because these are private entities, most often they're not posted anywhere. They're not publicly available. However, the public entities, let's say cities, municipalities, I've seen, not that I'm aware of like a database that they post these, but I've had like Googling stuff for a particular thing, and I've actually seen reports done for, let's say, this city or that city, publicly available, that you could actually like see online. But no, to my knowledge, there is no database that you could just type in a property address and it would pop up all the historical reports that were done for it, especially for private properties, unfortunately.
Perfect. Okay. Right before we end the session, there's one last question. It's from Pat Kandaya. So it's a very typical Pat type of question. So I would like to address it. So if Selvana can also give us his answer on this one as well. His question is, of course, great presentation and valuable points made here. He wants to know, based on today's market condition, although I don't think the question has to do anything with the market condition, can the buyers use environmental reports as an escape reason to withdraw from a deal? Now, let me, change how the question is being asked. Have you seen any scenarios where a buyer has been able to, cancel the transaction? Why? Because a phase one has indicated there is contamination and a phase two needs to take place, and then there's a massive cost. Now, in contract law standpoint, Selvana would simply give an answer here, but if the buyer is waiving conditions and they buy and they're dealing with a firm deal, then contract is a contract regardless of what happens to that residential property or that commercial property. Now, within conditional periods and within that time frame, if things have been examined and there's light on the issue, then there's a reasonable grounds to disarray from that contract in itself. Sam, have you seen any situations like this?
Well, first let me say that I'm not a lawyer, and I'm not pretending to be a lawyer. And when clients ask us for legal advice, we always refrain from giving legal advice. However, based on just personal experience and based on my understanding, the DD period is basically the period partly designed for both parties to do their due diligence for partly some of the same reasons, right? So let's say the buyer does due diligence, and the phase one, phase two, identify something, big enough for the buyer to walk away from the deal. We have developer clients that say, we have 60-day due diligence period. You need to do a phase one, phase two, geotech, all that kind of stuff. We want to make a decision whether or not to buy the property. So, and not being a lawyer, but I'm assuming that if there are clauses in the contract that would actually give you the freedom to walk away from the deal, if you're not fully satisfied based on the results of the environmental investigations done within the due diligence period, then I guess you have those options. Otherwise, you wouldn't. But again, I'm guessing it pretty much depends on the verbiage on the contract, right?
Definitely, that's exactly.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Kana. Pat, exactly what I both said. It's a contract law. Purchase sale agreement is a contract law between the buyer and the seller.
Exactly.
Whatever it in the contract we had to follow. If the condition is there for the environmental condition, in the who is the one paying the environmental report and what's the time period, and based on that one, the buyer's lawyer and seller's lawyer are going to make a decision maybe. But
Exactly.
as for our regular concern, it's a contract law, whatever it in the contract, Pat. Nothing to do with the special condition of the environmental condition here. This is the wording of the contract. Thank you so much, Sam. Thank you so much. I don't know, Mike already left. Still, pass our.
Of course.
Thank you so much. We can meet again once in a while. Thanks
No,
for the
like,
information,
of
Sam.
course,
Thank you
thank
so
you,
much.
everybody, for giving us this opportunity. I really appreciate that. I didn't expect so many people to be on this meeting. That's impressive. And Kenan has our contact information. We don't nickel and dime for providing consultation. If you have a property, you just want to ask a question, get some advice, feel free. My cell number anytime, any day.
Perfect. Thank you so much, sir. Again, I know Sam's and his company's information will be passed down to all of our agents. Great setup team. I've only dealt with Sam, I think, for the last in the last month and a half, maybe 2 months. We've been in contact, and
That's
we've
right.
already done 2 deals.
That's right.
And great team.
But through a mutual good friend that we have.
Yes, I'm very yes. We'll have dinner soon. But
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Everyone, enjoy your weekend and have a great day.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure. Take care. Bye.
Take care. Bye now.